What's up, family? What's up, everybody? We got a very special episode today. Very special. Gonna have Richard Wolff on, renowned economics professor, renowned lefty. Eager to talk to him today. We're gonna be covering some pretty good things. So I'm excited. He'll be on in about 12 minutes, and then we'll go from there. I will not be on for much longer after our conversation, just because I have some other things I have to get done today. But I will be streaming again tomorrow to kind of catch up on what's been going on in the news. But appreciate everyone for tuning in. What's up, Eric, McCade, Jameson? What's good? What's good? Lex, Sand Queen, Jackson, if you're in the chat, what's good, my guy? Algobus. Appreciate all y'all tuning in. It's gonna be a really good conversation. I'm really excited. To be able to get someone like Richard Wolff on the show is really cool. It's really cool that he responded, that he's willing to do this. Obviously, he's very busy with his time, so excited he's going to come on our small channel and talk with us. So it'll be a good time. How's everyone been doing today? Hump day, middle of the week. Everyone getting through it? Yeah, everyone make sure you hit the like button, comment, subscribe, get us up in the algorithm a little bit so we can get more people to see this conversation, which needs to be seen. Someone said, Ryan said, JJ and Dr. Wolff, mind blown. He is my hero. Well, I'm glad I could get him on the show. I'm glad I can get him on the show. I mean, I think in the economics field, it's really interesting because, I studied economics in college. And it's, at that time in college, I didn't know, too much about what, how economics truly worked, right? In the real world. And after, I started learning that type of stuff and then going back and thinking about what I learned in college, I mean, so much of it is they basically essentially, especially if you're at an elite liberal institution, they just teach you capitalism, right? They're teaching capitalism as an economic system. And, they're teaching it as if it's a given. It has to be this way and nothing can be changed. So like I have, there's people I know that are, still in college and then they have recently took a healthcare economics class where the economics professor is teaching the next generation, right, of youth how it's plausible and makes sense to have corporations extracting massive amounts of maximizing their profit. That's what economics is all about, maximizing your profit within the healthcare industry. And then they'll present something like, oh, you have a vertical demand curve, meaning, if it's a life-saving treatment, they'll pay whatever they can. Their demand is vertical because they'll pay whatever price. It doesn't matter what the price is. And then but then you'll be like, okay, what if they don't have the money to afford it? And then they'll just go to another thing like, oh, they just don't resolve that issue. And so it's interesting. It's interesting. So I kind of want to, delve into Professor Wolff's mind and how he teaches economics. Obviously he's a professor at Massachusetts Amherst. So I want to kind of get into how the way he teaches economics and if he wished more other economics schools or other economics teachers taught the way he teaches. So it'll be interesting. College just don't even touch on Marxism unless it's to deride it. Yeah. I actually remember I had a Marxist professor. And I thought that was super edgy in college. I was like, oh, wow, she's calling herself a Marxist. That's bold. Because like at the time, it's just like, I don't know. It's just crazy how it's kind of beat into your mind until you actually start questioning some of your early education, younger education when you're, kind of going through high school or really just throughout the entire curriculum up until college or even sometimes through college, how you don't challenge any of these, you don't really challenge any of the things that you're taught. You kind of just take it in. Like when I'm sitting in my economics class, I'm just taking in and I'm writing the things down and I'm trying to do well for this exam. But you don't even step back and think, wait, what they're teaching is bullshit. What they're teaching is it's okay for corporations to extract wealth from poor people and deny them healthcare. And I don't agree with that. And I don't think, and it's crazy because this is the only country that does that, right? And then if you try and question, those professors on that, they're like, oh, well, that's more political. I don't want I don't focus too much on the politics. I just focus on the economic side of things. Oh, that's such bullshit. That's such bullshit. I just brought up a question that you don't know the answer to, and it completely, completely challenges and questions your entire teaching, and you don't want to come to face with the fact that you're teaching something that doesn't make sense, and I can easily break it down with just a few questions, so then they deflect. Oh, that's not politics, that's just economics. So it's interesting. I'm excited to talk to Professor Wolff about that. We do have a few super chats. I want to make sure I read that for you guys. KRTD Media says hashtag US Solution Summit. Yeah, I will be speaking at the US Solution Summit, and let me get more information for you guys on that but I'm definitely gonna shoot that out. I think it's gonna be later this month in May. I think it's like May 22nd or something like that. So appreciate the super chat, KRTD. And then Brian Frederick with the super sticker. Appreciate that, Brian. Appreciate that. Yeah, so he should be coming in about 5 or 6 minutes. Up until then, we'll just kind of keep talking. Want to see how you guys are doing. What are you guys up to? I know I did see today that apparently they're going to waive the IP waiver for the World Trade Organization, which is really good, obviously. I don't know all the steps, the next steps when those countries are going to be able to have access to the vaccine or to that IP. I don't know if there's more. I don't know what else is going to have to happen, but at least that's a step, right? At least that's a good first step, and we'll have to keep pressure on and see where we can go from there. So before, I just want to make sure I got a great introduction for our next guest, because he deserves it. So I want everyone to welcome Professor Richard Wolff to the stream. How you doing, Professor Wolff? Thank you for coming
on. Thank you. Glad to be here.
1 second. I'm actually going to change my sound for 1 sec because I don't want there to be an echo. I apologize for that. I appreciate you getting here early. Like I'm like always I'm always like a little bit late, and I feel bad for my my audience, because I'm like, I don't want to have them waiting, but you came in here 4 or 5 minutes before time, so I appreciate that.
Okay, good.
So let me just give you the proper introduction I know you deserve. So this is Professor Richard D. Wolff. He's a professor of economics emeritus at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, where he taught economics from 1973 to 2008. He is currently a visiting professor in the graduate program in international affairs of the New School University in New York City. Earlier, he taught economics at Yale University and the City College of the City University of New York. In 1994, he was a visiting professor of economics at the University of Paris. Wolff was also a regular lecturer at the Brecht Forum in New York City. Wow. So you've been busy. Let's just say that you've been pretty busy in your adult life, and I can only hope to be able to do that much with my time. But I definitely appreciate it, and I want to kind of jump in right there because I was just talking with my audience about economics in and of itself, being studied at the college level. I know I went to Northwestern, and I actually studied economics. That was my major. And when I was in college, I didn't really have a really good worldview of kind of how, economics in this country or really the world worked. And the way I was taught at Northwestern, and I think this can probably go for most universities, they essentially are just teaching capitalism, how capitalism works as a system, right? And, more specifically, if you have a healthcare economics class, they're going to teach you how it's okay for a corporation to maximize profit, even if that means they're extracting it from poor people who then can't afford their insurance or their medical care. So it's just very interesting kind of stepping back and seeing economics from that perspective. Do you see, like, within your profession that you're, kind of an outlier, someone who teaches economics from a different perspective, a different framework than most of your peers? And how does that make you feel, knowing that that teaching is them teaching a system that is, completely brought us to this very unequal system that we have today in this country?
Well, you've asked the right question. So, Albert Einstein once said, the hard part is asking the right question. Once you've got that straightened out, finding the answer is pretty straightforward. To answer your question, yes, I feel marginalized most of my adult life. I've been a professor of economics, and I was marginalized. And the reason was very simple. I was critical. I looked
Mhm.
around me. I saw inequality. I saw suffering. I saw wealth side by side with extreme poverty. And
Mhm.
no one ever gave me a reason to believe that this was necessary or normal or moral or anything. And I would keep
Mhm.
asking questions, making my teachers a little bit uncomfortable. And yeah, I learned to live with the fact that I'm a critic, and I did have an advantage for a whole lot of reasons about my personal life. I went to the elite schools of the United States. I went to Harvard as an undergraduate. Then I went to Stanford, I got a master's degree, and I got my PhD in economics at Yale. So I'm a little poster boy for elite education in the United
Mhm.
States.
Yes, you
And I can assure you that nothing special happens at these places. I mean, they spend a lot of money to make you think
Mhm.
it does,
Yep.
but it doesn't. But it has one real effect. If you ever get into trouble, you just wave your pedigree around, and
Mhm.
people in America back off and think that there's something special about you. So I was able to get jobs as a professor despite my critical perspective. So, for
Mhm.
example, over most of my life, I had to teach exactly the kind of economics you described at Northwestern. It's very
Really?
typical.
Didn't know
Yeah,
that.
it's very typical. You teach how capitalism works. You teach that if
Mm.
and when it has any problems, it fixes itself,
Mhm. The
or
market,
it
right?
needs a little, a little help from the government, and then everything is straightened out and okay again. And
Mhm.
it struck me as junk, as nonsense. I didn't believe it. I don't believe it today. I haven't believed it for 30 or 40 years now.
Mhm.
Up until recently, I would therefore get an invitation, to give a talk or to go on the radio or TV. I would say on average once every 3 or 4 months. But after the crash in 2008 and 9, so in other words, over the last 10 years or so, everything changed.
Mhm.
Americans, at least large numbers of Americans, suddenly realized, or maybe they understood it before but were afraid to say it, but they began to say, this system isn't working for me. This
Mhm.
system is really messed up. This system makes a few people very wealthy, but an awful lot of us are not able to get the so-called American dream. We were led to think if we
Mhm.
worked hard and studied hard and got a degree and did all the right things, we would get that American dream. We could promise it to ourselves, to our husbands, our wives, our boyfriends, our girlfriends, to our children, all of that. And the last 10 years, particularly, but even the last 20 or 30, have been a pretty relentless lesson to the American people that it's
Mhm.
not, the system isn't going to give it to them. It just
Right.
isn't. And for me, everything changed. So
Mhm.
instead of getting an invitation once every 3 or 4 months, I do 3 or 4 radio and television interviews every day. This is my fourth one with you
Mhm.
today.
Wow.
It's just
Uh,
it's look, and for me, I'm a teacher.
mhm.
I'm having the time of my life. I never
Right.
expected to be in demand. So
Right.
now
Yeah. Especially coming
people are
from where
not
you came from.
afraid the way they used to be. They're not
Mm.
afraid to think about the system
Yeah.
critically. They're not
Well,
afraid to hear someone say, we could do better than this. And there's
mhm.
really no reason why we don't go in that direction. They want me to explain what I mean. They're not necessarily persuaded, and I don't
Mhm.
expect that, but they're open. And for
Right.
me, living my life in this country, I was born in Ohio, I've lived here all my life.
Mhm.
The openness I now see is like a bear coming out of hibernation. You know, you've been down in
Mhm.
that cold, wet cave for a long time, and
Yep.
suddenly you realize, you know, the daffodils are out. It's
Mhm.
warm. It's it's beautiful. And as I say, it's an extraordinary time in this country's history.
Do you kind of going right off of that, speaking of hibernation, like, where are the true origins for where the word socialism became so pervasive in our modern society? Because if you study history, it was much more favorable back in the early 1900s. And then because of all the right wing attacks and really just anyone who kind of buys into this neoliberal economic framework that we find ourselves in, they kind of caricature socialism as this very certain thing, right? There's long bread lines, there's no choice, et cetera, et cetera. But after COVID, we kind of saw, and that's why I think some of these crises show people it's that everything they caricature socialism as is that actually occurs right here in this very country, which is the most hyper capitalist country in the world. So do you see socialism kind of coming, after 2008, 2009, where so many people, lost that American dream that they were told that they need to chase, by losing their homes, which is how they were building their wealth, et cetera, et cetera. And then 2020 with COVID and, having short supply on so many things and losing your jobs and these just boom bust cycles. Do you feel like socialism kind of has that, maybe potential to come out of that hibernation state that it's been in for so long since the beatdown, of the right wing and the economic liberals?
Short answer, absolutely. It's not a question of will it, it's already happening. I
Hmm.
mean, give you an idea. One of my classmates at Yale when I got my PhD in economics was a young woman named Janet Yellen, who's now the Treasury
Wow.
Secretary. You know, if you go to
Wow.
the kinds of schools I went to, those are the people you hang around with because those are the
Hmm.
ones that go there. I mean, my family had no money. I was one of those people they picked up and gave a scholarship to so I could
Hmm.
go. And I was supposed to fall in love with all of that and want to be rich and famous and all the rest of it.
Hmm.
I get that. I understand that. It just didn't work for me. And I don't say it as someone who isn't for sale. I am. I'm sure I'm for sale. They just don't have enough. They can't buy me anymore. It's too late.
Right.
Yeah, socialism is happening. When I met with old friends of mine who are very high, I won't mention the name, but who are very high officials of the Democratic Party, I remember sitting down with one of them to have a drink back when Bernie Sanders decided to run for office for the 2016 presidential election, announcing that he was a socialist and he wasn't going to run away from the name. And I
Hmm.
remember talking to this man and saying to him, well, what do you think? Is it going to be important? Oh, no, he said. Socialism, if you don't run away from that title, you're writing your own political suicide note. You're done.
Hmm.
You'll go nowhere. People will attack you, make fun of you, all the rest of it. And, I didn't have the basis to disagree. I mean, that was his opinion. It made as much sense as anything I could come up with. But it was all wrong. It
Hmm.
turned out that Bernie was right, that the willingness to think about it and listen to the guy, not to turn him off because he was a socialist, was very strong. He got millions and millions of votes, which nobody who's in the business foresaw. And he did
Hmm.
it again in 2020. And now we have, Cory Bush and Alexandria Ocasio Cortez and a whole raft of others coming up in across
Hmm.
the country. No, socialism is now in and part of the American conversation. And I, for one, could not be happier about it. Look, it wasn't healthy in the last 75 years. It wasn't healthy what we did.
Hmm.
We were a closed down authoritarian country. Let me give you an idea. Um, when people ask me, "Are you a Marxist economist?" I never know quite how to answer this question because I understand what they're doing. They want to set me up for a bad word and then throw the bad word at me. So I say to them, well, if you mean, have I learned from the works of Marx and Marxists, then the answer is unambiguously, absolutely. I've learned a lot. But I've also learned from all kinds of other people. You don't ask me, am I a Smithian? Am I a Ricardian? Am I any of the other ones? You
Right.
don't ask me because you're not worried about that. But so you're not really interested in my formation and my way of thinking. You're interested in hitting me over the head with a bad label. I mean, and I'm not going to play your game. So I'm going to say, yeah, I'm a Marxist. Why not? Because in America, it's important to be able to say, hey, here I am. I
Yeah.
don't have any horns. I got a point of view. I'm just as American as the next person. And,
Yeah.
I've lived in this country all my life. And I think we can do better than capitalism. And I think we ought to. Human beings who lived in slavery figured out that they could do better than slavery. People who lived in feudalism, who were serfs, yearned to be free of that system and finally did it. And I think the mass of employees in a capitalist system have the same yearning that slaves had long ago and serfs had long ago. And I want to be part of the effort to do better. Every economic system, and let me put my professor's hat on for just a minute. Every economic system was born, evolved, and changed over time, and then it died, just like we will as animals, just like plants do. And slavery was born, evolved, and died. And feudalism was born, evolved, and died. Capitalism was born, evolved. We all know what the next step is. It's that capitalism dies. It really isn't whether, it's only when and how. And I'm here to say to you, and I haven't believed this until really the last few years, I now think, in a way I never did before, that capitalism, at least the US type, is over. That the good times in this economic system are behind us. We've peaked, and it is always difficult and painful on the way down. It doesn't give you that heady rush on the way up. The 19th and 20th century were the way up, not for all Americans, heaven knows, but for many. And that's over. And the real question is, will the American people face this, deal with it, and come up with a plan of how to manage it? Because if they don't, it's going to get more difficult and more painful in the years ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can all see that after 2008, 2009, America
Right.
kind of has been on a steady decline. And I really think COVID just accelerated that to another level, So I think, I'm kind of curious as to what your take on what that transition can look like, right? You mentioned that we got, some of these socialists in Congress now, but it kind of feels like, and I don't know how closely you've been following it, but there's been a lot of people that have been pushing, the socialists in Congress, who some of them don't really claim to be true socialists, but regardless, let's say the ones that agree on certain socialist policies like Medicare for all and things like that, free college, they don't really seem to be voting and coming together as a block to kind of push these policies and actually hold these policies up as as like a red line in the sand on whether or not they'll support some of these bills. So if I don't want to be cynical or anything like that, but if we're looking forward and there doesn't seem like we have a whole lot of representation for what the American people want and to get those actual policies in place, how do you see that transition happening? Like you said, do you think like because there's a lot of people, American people that understand it, but we don't have that representation, that it might be more, I guess, I don't know if it's going to be violent, but it definitely doesn't seem like it's going to be a smooth transition into a new economy. What's your take on that?
Well, you've raised a number of issues. I don't believe anybody who was born and lived his life like I have in the United States could be very hopeful about no violence. We live in an unbelievably violent society. The number of people who commit violent crimes is greater than in any other country that I know. The number of people we stick in prison is worse or larger. What we do to the people we put in prison almost always makes them worse off when they come out compared to when they went in. It's a wonderful example of a failed policy, but the people who run this society don't know what else to do, so the failure keeps ramifying. Let me say a word also, a little bit of a defense for Bernie and AOC and the others. Look, things are going very fast. It's frightening to many Americans how fast it's going. How many of us expected to see those people on the 6th of January beating the hell out of cops in the middle of the Congress? I mean, we are seeing left and right. We just finished a 20-year war in Afghanistan that the United States lost. That's why we're leaving in September with no conditions. Longest war in American history. The whole world calls it a defeat. It won't be called that here because Americans can't handle that they lost that war, that they lost the one in Vietnam, that they lost the one in Iraq. So there's a lot of pretending going on. But if you stop for a minute, you can kind of see $1 trillion later, all those dead people and wounded people, Americans, Afghanistani people, and the Taliban, our ostensible enemy, is stronger today. Everyone knows that than they were when we got there 20 years ago. I mean, that's what you call a failure. I
don't want to interrupt too much,
Right.
but I do want to say there has been some kind of waffling on whether there'll be privatized mercenaries still allowed to be there.
Exactly.
So it's like I've said this on the show many times. Our standards are so low in this country, right? Our standards are so damn low. So just the fact that Biden says we'll leave without conditions has a lot of people up in arms, but we will, obviously have to keep pushing on that and wait and see. But go ahead and continue.
Yeah. Anyway, what I wanted to say was to say that AOC and Bernie and all the others, they're being affected by how fast things are going. So, yeah, I think we're going to be disappointed from time to time. They're trying to figure out what it means to be a socialist in a Congress that has really no room for that. They're looked down on by the leaders of the Democratic Party, even worse by the Republican. I mean, you know all this. So, I mean, they're pushing against the stream. They need those of us that are outside, that don't have to work things out with Nancy Pelosi or anybody else like that. They need us to push them, even if they don't understand it. Yes. The more we push, the easier it'll be for them there to push. They need our help. And the best of them know that. And so
politicians,
for me,
they'll be pushed by somebody. It's either going to be the right wingers in their own party, or it's going to be us from the outside, which is why we have to continue pushing.
It's our job that people who have an audience like you do, that have a platform as you do, and that I do too, we have to be out there literally beating the bushes, saying the things that it may be difficult for them to say. So let me do one. What's the transition? That's how you began. Well, I think in order to focus people on what has to be done, you have to first pinpoint what's wrong. What's the key thing or things that we have to focus on? And here's my candidate, my pitch. I think many of the problems, whether it's inadequate wages for human beings to live properly, or inadequate food and clothing and shelter and homelessness and climate, all the catastrophes that are crowding in on America today. One of the key things that lies behind them is the way we have organized the enterprises, the workplaces, where most adults, the factory, the office, the store, wherever you go, most adults spend most of their lives 5+ days a week, if not more, at work. And there's something about work that is so wrong that it kind of jumps out at you once you let yourself see it. And here's what it is. The way we've organized the overwhelming majority of factories, offices, and stores is the opposite of democracy. In other words, just hear me out, if you will. At the top of these things is an owner or a board of directors if it's a corporation. The owner is a tiny one person or a family of people, And the board of directors in most corporations, 15, 20 people, that's all it is. A tiny number. The vast majority of people in any enterprise are the employees. The first group, the minority, are the employers. And the employers are not accountable to the employees. We, as employees, we have no power at all. Where we live, we can vote for the mayor or the council member or the senator. But where we work, we don't vote for anybody. There are no votes. There are no elections.
No vote.
That's right. And not only does the guy in office not depend on our vote, but the guy in office can turn to us and say, you're out of here. You're fired. Don't come back Monday. It's Friday. Here's your pay envelope. I never want to set out. And he can do that. He can take my job. He can take my income. He can plunge my family into the crisis that implies. He can mess up the community, the local store I can't shop at anymore because I've lost my job. That hurts the storekeeper and his or her family. I mean, look at the power they have over us. And it's a minority exercising unaccountable power over a majority. For me, I reached the following conclusion. This is not a democratic country or society. It has a kind of democracy in the residential communities where we live, but it has excluded democracy from the workplaces where we spend an enormous amount of our time and upon which we depend. We don't keep that job, we're not going to keep the residential home that we have in that community. Look, a lot of people have lost their homes in the last 10 years because they couldn't make the rent or they couldn't make the mortgage payment because somebody fired them. Here's a statistic for everybody to see it another way. Since March of last year, 82, that's the current count, 82 million Americans had to go and file for unemployment compensation. 82 million. Now, some of them were only unemployed a few weeks. Some of them were unemployed the whole 15 months, and a lot of them in somewhere in between. But here's what we know. If you're unemployed, you immediately use up any savings you've had. You begin to lean on your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your husband, your wife, your children, your parents, whoever can help you at a time when they're having difficulty, maybe losing their job too. So it's really hard. Well, you know what the total size of the American labor force is? 160 million. If 82 million were that means more than half the majority of workers in this country experienced unemployment for some period of time during the last 15 months. Over the same period of time, the 650 billionaires we have in America, that's all we have, 650 people who own $1 billion or more, they saw their combined wealth go up almost $1 trillion if you add it all together. What kind of a system works like that? I mean, do I have to prove to people that this system doesn't work? These numbers scream out at the world. This is a system that may be good for a tiny number of the super rich at the top, but for the overwhelming vast majority, this system stinks. It's over. It's not doing its job anymore. It had its good moments. It had its good years. It did some important things. I'm not stupid. I'm not going to take away everything. But the reality is what it is. I didn't make it this way. So here's my notion of what we have to do. It's simple. We have to democratize the enterprise. We have to bring democracy where it should have been from the get-go. It never was. We never allowed it into our factories, offices, and stores. So here's what I want and what I fight for. Everybody who works in a factory, store, office, or store, one person, one vote. Together, we decide what this enterprise is going to produce, what technology it's going to use. We decide where the production is going to happen. And then we decide together, what are we going to do with whatever profits all of us working together were able to generate. We're not going to allow an unaccountable minority to make all these decisions that we have to live with, but we're excluded from making. And let me tell you why I think that's a solution. If we had a democratic decision making, you think the workers in a factory or an office or a store would give a few people at the top wild amounts of money while the rest of us can't send our kids to college? Not going to happen. You think we would close our enterprise and move to China? No, we have our lives here. We have our family, our friends, our community. We don't want to go to China. So the whole exodus of American jobs would never have happened because we wouldn't have had a decision-making apparatus that would ever get you that result. And here's something else. You know, if a rich company, the way we run them in capitalism, wants to introduce a new technology that is very bad for the air or the water or the noise, a few members of the board of directors who live 50 miles away in some elegant gated community, they're going to get together and say, let's have this new technology. It makes more profit, because they don't have to live with the bad air or the bad water. They live in a gated community 50 miles away, and they can deal with those problems. But all the workers are stuck. Well, guess what? If the workers themselves made a decision about technology, they wouldn't put into place something that threatens the health of their children or themselves or their family. They're not going to do it. They're not going to do it because they have an immediate interest. Last point. I believe that if people have what we used to call skin in the game, you know, if people have a direct interest in something, they pay attention. I think if working people owned and operated democratically the enterprises we all depend on, they would behave in a completely different way. I think the efficiency we would see under that system way ahead of what we see now. I remember one of my first jobs as a professor. We got a memo from the administration. Please remember that on your way out of the office building, please turn the lights off in the bathroom because it will save us electric bill at the end of the month. We all read this memo, and we put it in the famous circular file, and then nobody did it. Why? Well, because it's not us. We all have our little grievances that our salaries aren't what they should be, that the administrators who make these memos sit in much nicer offices than the professors get. So, you know, the tension in there expressed itself on not closing the light. But, you know, if it were my university, if I were part, I'd have a wholly different, I'd make sure. And if I saw someone leaving with the light on, I'd say something nicely to him or her. Hey, say, it's not good for us. I'd explain it. I think that would multiply 1,000,000 times, and that we would see the efficiency in our system get way, way better. But I would live in a society then that didn't distribute income unequally. We'd never have this craziness of billionaires living I live in Manhattan in New York City. So where I'm sitting now, you go 2 miles in one direction and you see some of the worst poverty on this planet. You go 2 miles the other direction and you see some of the biggest wealth.
Billionaires Row,
it's incredible, and it's not healthy for either side.
Yeah, I mean, what are the best, I guess, real world examples of like worker-owned co-ops or that type of democracy in the workplace that we can maybe look to as an example, if that exists, you know, for where the future of, you know, democracy in the workplace and just like workplace relationships and dynamics can be in this country?
Yep, there are plenty of examples, and people should not hear what I'm saying as some, you know, pie in the sky utopian fantasy of a lovely future. I mean, it is all those things, but it's also something that people have, in fact, built, struggled for and built. And they've done it in the United States and outside. They have worked together and done co-ops. I have a colleague. She was once a student with me at the University of Massachusetts, Jessica Gordon Nembhard, who wrote a wonderful book. You might want to interview her sometime on worker co-ops in the history of the African American community in the United States,
Wow.
particularly in the South. They're some of the people who worked their way to survive in a hostile environment by this cooperation. But let me give you two or three of the most famous examples. Probably the most famous is a worker co-op in Spain. It's called the Mondragon Cooperative Corporation. You can look it up. It's got a lot of Google, websites and all that. Mondragon, Mondragon, named after a small city in the north of Spain. It started in 1956, so it's not that old. But it's been around, 70 years or so. Was started by a Roman Catholic priest, a man named Father Arizmendi, a parish priest in this part of Spain. Spain is a Catholic country. And he made a famous speech to his parish. If we wait for someone to come in here and give us all jobs, we'll all die of old age before that happens. Everybody giggled and understood. But he was very serious. So he said, let's not wait. Let's be our own boss. Let's set up a worker co-op. So under the protection, because he was a priest of the church, together with 6 workers, that's how he started, in 1956, he set up a worker co-op. It worked like this. All 6 of the workers, together with Father Arizmendi, who worked alongside them, they made all the decisions democratically, majority vote.
Yeah.
They had 7 people, 6 workers and a priest. And everything they did was discussed and decided. There was no employer who was somewhere else or some other person, none of that. All right, fast forward to 2021. That enterprise grew. It now includes well over 100,000 workers. This is the 7th largest corporation in Spain. It's actually a family of about 200 worker co-ops, all working under one corporate umbrella. Some of them are manufacturing, some of them are services. It includes, for example, the largest supermarket chain in Spain is part of it. And here's what they've done. Every one of these co-ops, well, not everyone, but almost every one of these co-ops works in the way I described. The workers get together and they make the decisions. And here are some of the decisions you might find interesting. Number 1, they made the decision that the highest paid person cannot get more than roughly 8 times what the lowest paid person gets. Here in the United States, your typical large corporation CEO gets roughly 300 times what the lowest worker gets. In other words, they made a decision, not that everybody gets the same. That's a caricature. Very few co-ops do that. Some, but very few. They made the decision, though, that they didn't want the gap between rich and poor to be crazy. So 8-to-1 is the limit. You got to be somewhere in there. Here's the second thing you might find cute. Twice a year, they have a meeting of all the workers, where one of the things on the agenda is to discuss the supervisors, because they hire people to supervise. And there's a discussion, and then there's a vote. And the workers vote whether they're satisfied with the supervisor or not. And if they're not, they fire the supervisor. So Americans have to hear this. It's not the supervisor. That's right. It's not the supervisor who hires and fires you. It's the other way around. And that's what it means. All right, here's a second example. This is in northern Italy, around the city of Bologna, which is one of the major cities in northern Italy. And the area is called, forget the name, Romagna. Emilia Romagna is the area. In that area of Italy, roughly 40% of all enterprises are worker co-ops. I give it
Right.
as an example because it's been that way for many decades. And
Mhm.
that's what the people want there. They want a mixed economy. They want the opportunity for their children to decide, do you want to work in a top-down hierarchical where there's a boss you don't know who holds
Mhm.
your life in his hands? Or do you want to be part of a democratically run enterprise? So
Mhm.
those children wouldn't have that freedom of choice if they didn't have a big sector of the economy, in this case, 40%. And now the last example here from the United States. I'm going to pick, there are many, there are hundreds, there are thousands of worker co-ops. There's even a federation in this country. It's called the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops. Anybody who's interested in finding out about them, just go there. They have a website. They hook them all up together so that you can find out
Mhm.
about them. But the one I like the most, which I have visited, is in the Bay Area of California, based in San Francisco. And it's called the Arizmendi Bakeries. They took the name of that priest in
Mhm.
Spain who started it there. They have a bakery, they have a cheese and coffee shop, they have a
Mhm.
pizza joint. They
Mhm.
started many years ago with one store. They now have 5 stores in the
Wow.
greater Bay Area, and every one of them is run as a democratic worker co op, owned and operated by the people who work there. And I invite any of you, look it up, go visit. These folks are happy to tell you what they've done, how they've done it, and why they believe in it. What I would wish, and if I advised Ocasio Cortez or anybody like that, I don't, but if I did, I would say, here's what I want you to do. Americans need the freedom of choice to buy from and to work in either a capitalist enterprise run the traditional way or a democratic worker co op. Right now, Americans do not have that freedom of choice. There are
Mhm.
way too few worker co ops to give
Right.
you that choice. So, what we ought to have in the name of freedom of choice, which Americans are supposed to want, what we need is a government program. And the government program should go like this: any business in this country that wants to continue in its capitalist way, go ahead. You're free to do it. But if you either plan to leave the United States or to close your business or to sell your business to somebody else, before you can do those things, you have to give your own workers what's called the right of first refusal. That is, you
Mhm.
have to offer to your own workers to sell them the business.
Hmm.
And why? Because that's how those workers can keep their jobs. Because,
Right. Yeah.
if you close the place or you leave or you sell it to somebody else, what happens to them
Yeah,
is
that's
now
true.
in someone else's hands. You're
Right.
putting them at a very serious risk. So the government should require you to, if the workers don't want it, if the workers don't have the money, well, then you're free to go ahead and do whatever else you want. But they
Mhm.
get the what's called the right of first refusal. And then when critics will say to us, those of us who push this, well, where are the workers going to get it? I smile and I answer, if we win, one of the first things this government will do will be to offer assistance, capital, low interest loans to workers so they can do it.
Yeah.
That, by the way, we didn't
They do it
invent.
to yeah, they offer 0% interest loans all the time to their billionaire friends and these,
That's right. And even
massive
over the years,
corporations.
many years ago, small businesses in America complained that banks wouldn't lend to them. They only lent to the big businesses. So we set up something called a Small Business Administration, and it gives low interest or free loans. It gives
Right.
technical advice. It arranges for the government to order goods and services from those kinds of enterprises. Well, I got a great idea. How about next door to the Small Business Administration, you set up the Cooperative Business Administration and do the same thing for co-ops that you did for small, because they are a new and different way. And I think they would be a way to solve the problems of this society, which I don't see getting solved any other way.
No, I mean, it's true, and just the like you said, the way our system is set up and functions, it's set up so that those massive corporations can pay off the politicians to ensure that those
Absolutely.
very things don't happen. And that's why you need to have some type of groundswell of workers, people on the ground that this actually affects, who has that skin in the game to actually push something like that forward. So I want to transition just a little bit, because I saw your interview on Crystal Kyle and Friends, and they were asking you a question about inflation, and you rightfully, in my opinion, talked about how we see inflation happening within the stock market. Obviously, something like COVID happens, the economy's completely screwed, yet the stock market is still, burgeoning to levels never seen, in history, right? So we obviously see that within the stock market. Then I did hear you mention that, no one really has a good grasp or understanding or true, like, kind of within one single box or parameter definition of inflation. But what I would argue is that, with skyrocketing food prices, skyrocketing energy prices, skyrocketing commodity prices, which is just increasing the cost of living for kind of the people who are already on the margins, right? People who already were trying to budget just to survive. Now they have to pay so much more for their food. Like, it's just decreasing their purchasing power. So in my head, it's like, what is a measure of inflation if not for, how the people that are least amongst us, that could barely afford to live now that things are more expensive, they're in an even worse position. So how do you see us remedying that, and is that the kind of economic dynamics that you're seeing in the country right now?
Yes, I mean, the last few weeks have seen unmistakable evidence of rising prices across the board: food, clothing, shelter, transportation, energy, education. I mean, there's no end to it. And it's for me, I look upon it as a kind of horrible joke being played by capitalism on all of us. Here we've had years of struggling, a fight for 15, get the minimum wage up from 7.25, which is what it is, among the lowest in the industrial world, up to $15. But even the proposal, which Biden couldn't get through, but even the proposal he has is going to raise it over the period between now and 2025. Well, given the rising prices we now face, by the time you get $15 in 5 years, it won't enable you to buy any more than you can now. It's like, it's this horrible joke that you're pulling the rug out from a person who has been struggling to get on to that place on the floor where that rug is. And just as they finally get to the last step, the rug is gone and the cold floor greets them. I mean, for me, let me put it this way. The way to judge an economic system is to ask the simplest questions. Does it provide a decent life, food, clothing, shelter, education, medical care? We all know what that's about. There's no mystery. Does it provide that to people, or does it not? And the way it works in our kind of economy, either you have to give people enough money so they can buy all those things, or if you don't, you got to bring down the prices so the little money you give them is enough so they can afford. I mean, one or the other, or some combination. If you're not doing that, I don't care as an economist about the details. I don't want to get into the weeds of, gee, you should pay them more, or gee, the prices should be less. The bottom line is, it's got to be a combination of enough income and a set of prices, so either you get the job done or you fail as an economic system. We don't work like that. We don't have a system that sets it up that way. We allow, and this is perhaps one of the most important things people need to learn, in a private capitalist enterprise economy, we allow prices to be set by the capitalists, by the employers. You can't tell me of any factory or office or store in which the workers get together and decide, let's see what's going to be charged for what we produce. No. That's what the people at the top decide. The owner, the board of directors, the shareholders, whatever. The people at the top make the decisions. We allow that, even though the decision they make changes our life. If they jack up the prices, as you put it, everybody on the edge is now thrown over the edge because they can't afford the higher prices. I mean,
Right.
this is not rocket science, but you're allowing all of us who pay prices to be held hostage by the tiny minority who set the prices. So let me give you an example of how it works. Over the last 3 months, under the new Biden government in this country, Mr. Biden announced he's doing a COVID program. He's doing an infrastructure program. He's doing the American plan, the family plan. I mean, he is going to be spending trillions of dollars of the government to do all these things, or at least he's going to try. You know what goes through the mind of every capitalist employer in this country? Oh boy, there's going to be a lot of people with money in their hands. This is a time when I can raise my prices, and so I can suck a good part of that money right into my account. They're free to do that. That's what free enterprise means. And they're going to do it. They've just announced it. It's like a slap in the face to Mr. Biden, but he's so used to it, he doesn't even notice. Because when they say they're all jacking up their prices, they're undercutting the whole point and purpose of the extra spending, which was supposed to improve people's lives. But it's not, because they're allowing these folks, a tiny minority, to basically neuter the whole point of the program. That's why if you don't change the system, all you do is a law over here, a program over there. This is a system that can undercut, can just erase what you're doing. That's why what I mean when I say it's a system problem. It needs a system change.
Right. I mean, it just exacerbates the crises, right? Like you're giving people money, because they need it, but that money is going to go directly to who? A landlord, or it's going to go directly to a bank because, you have some type of debt you have to pay. So it's being funneled right from the
back
workers,
to the same people.
Right back to the same people. So if you're not actually transforming the system, you're not actually changing the system, then what you're actually doing, like what Joe Biden did when he, was going to subsidize something like Cobra, which is extremely wasteful and just a giveaway to insurance companies. What you're going to do is you're taking, some people say MMT, and actually taking taxpayer dollars, et cetera, et cetera. But just for the sake of argument, you're taking money that's flowing into the government and you're pushing it right out to people like healthcare executives who are going to jack up their prices, farm executives that are going to jack up prices for the vaccine. When you have to get these booster shots, you're taking the money that is really, coming from, taxpayers. You're giving it to those companies. And then you're saying, well, I'm helping the taxpayer. I'm helping the worker because I'm subsidizing their Cobra payment. Right. So it's almost like a backdoor way of giving more money to their donors. And it is really fucked up. And a lot of people don't really understand it because they don't understand how the system works. But like you were saying, that's why the system needs to be changed. Do you, I know you kind of have some time constraints, but do you have 10 more minutes? Because I just want to dive into one more.
Listen, as we said to each other at the beginning of this show, Justin, this kind of conversation, this kind of exploration, that's what we need. That's what the country needs to figure out. There are a lot of smart people. If we can just get them to understand, they'll come up with better solutions than we can.
For sure. So, in light of kind of what we were talking about earlier with like socialism overall and how it kind of has gotten such a bad rap for the past 60, 70 years from all the attacks from the right wing, from, neoliberals, et cetera, et cetera. We kind of see that same thing happening with China, who is an emerging economic superpower. So what, I know you've talked about China a good deal in their economic system. Can you first kind of explain to us how you would define China's economic system? Because it seems like it has a few different elements to it that don't make it, as just like, oh, this is strictly capitalist or strictly socialist. So how do you define the dynamics at play there in China and their economic system?
Good, great question. Let me try in a short amount of time to do this. Let's start with what the Chinese themselves say. They refer to themselves as a socialist economy with Chinese characteristics. And what they're trying to say there is they're like socialisms in other parts of the world, but they're also different from them because they have a unique Chinese way of doing this. And remember, China is one of the oldest cultures and nations in the world. They are the largest country in the world. Many Americans don't seem to realize that for every American citizen, there are 4 Chinese citizens. That is, their population is 4 times the size of the United States. They also don't seem to understand some of the basic achievements of the Chinese economy over the last 25, 30 years. So let me begin by telling you about them, because if you don't understand this, everything about China is going to be muddled in your mind. Okay, over the last 30 years, the real wage in the United States, that is the amount of money you get adjusted for the prices you have to pay, has been stagnant. That is, we've averaged somewhere around 0.5% a year increase in what our wages allow us to buy. And given the fuzziness of all statistics, if you end up with a number like 0.5% a year, it's no change at all, because there's so many things that the statistics don't quite capture that you're really going nowhere. Over the same 25 years, the last 25 years, the average real wage, what a Chinese average worker can afford to buy with the wages he or she gets, has quadrupled. In other words, it's gone up 4 times. There's no contest.
Yeah,
if you want to
imagine that here.
if you want to understand how Chinese working people feel about their system, imagine what Americans would feel if I had been able to say, as I wish I could have, that our standard of living for the average American working person is 4 times greater. The Chinese do not have debts like we do. They don't need debts. Just like we didn't need to have debts the way we have now 50 years ago, because our wages were going up, and that allowed us to buy and pay for a rising standard of living without going into debt. Okay, this is a reality. For the last 30 years, the gross output of goods and services achieved by the Chinese economy has grown on average between 6 and 9% a year. Over the same 25 years, the total output of goods and services produced by the United States economy has grown between 2 and 3% a year. That's why they caught up, because they are growing faster. And this is not, I'm not endorsing China or preferring China. I'm just telling you, all of you watching or listening, these are realities. Most of the world is poor. In most of Asia, Africa, Latin America, people are poor. And one of the highest priorities they have is to stop being poor. Most Americans understand that perfectly well. So they want an economic system that is going to get them out of poverty. Now, the most successful economy of this century is the People's Republic of China. There's just no way out. And that's why they are as powerful in the world as they have become. That's why they have the goodwill of so many parts of the world. And they have the enmity of some, and they've done bad things. That's not the issue. But you have to understand it. So what have they done? The dominant political party there is the Communist Party. It controls that society from the top. No other party is able to contest what they do. So, and they've been in charge since their revolution brought them to power, which was in 1949. So it's now 70 years they've been there. And they had that famous leader at the beginning who won the revolution, Mao Zedong. He's dead, and he's been now followed by a succession of Chinese Communist Party leaders. But their idea of how to build the Chinese economy went as follows. We are not going to do what the Soviet Union did. That was the first socialist experiment in the 20th century. We're not going to make all the industries in this country owned and operated by the government. The Russians did that for all kinds of reasons we don't have time to go into. The Chinese made a decision around 1960-65 not to do that. They had started in that direction, but they changed. And they decided they want, here we go now, a mixed economy. That's the socialism, because the Communist Party, representing the working class, that's how they talk, is going to run everything. But we're going to allow private enterprises alongside state enterprises. Not only private enterprises owned and operated by Chinese citizens, but foreigners too. British, Japanese, American. We're gonna invite them in, and we're gonna say, we've got something for you here. We've got a well-educated, because we have a good school system, well-trained, disciplined labor force that's willing to work at a small fraction of the wage you're used to. So you can come here, get very good workers, and pay them way less. And that's good for your profits. Right. Number one. Number two, we are raising the wages of our workers quite steadily, which means they're going to be a fast-growing market because they're going to have more money each year, which means they're going to be going into stores to buy stuff. So if you come here into China, we're going to give you cheap labor and a growing market. And because we have 1.4 billion people, 4 times what the US has, this is going to be the biggest growing market in the world. Little footnote, General Motors sells more cars in China now than it does in the United States. That's the bigger market for them. Right. Now, what the Chinese said is, we want something from you. You get the cheap labor, you get access to the market. We want partners with you. We want to learn your technology. We want to learn what your businesses know how to do. We're very smart people. We can pick it up. We can develop our own, which they've done, and they've shown the world. So they had a system, which they have to this day, partly government-owned and operated enterprises, side by side with both Chinese private capitalist enterprises and foreign capitalist private enterprises. And I call them capitalist because they all use the employer-employee division of the workplace, which is what capitalism is. Right. We distinguish capitalism from slavery because in slavery, they had a master and a slave. And in feudalism, they had a lord and a serf. And what we have is an employer and an employee, which is both like and a little different from those earlier ones. The Chinese, at least so far, have not done away with the employer-employee. So when you hear me advocating a democratic workplace, they don't have that in China at this point. Not in the state enterprises, not in the private Chinese enterprises, and not in the foreign enterprises. They are all capitalist. Chinese and foreign are private, and the government is state capitalist, because in that situation, the employer is a state official. The question you can ask, and perfectly reasonable, is the commitment of the Chinese ultimately to get to the point where the workers literally run the enterprises, become democratic worker co-ops? They say that that's their objective, but it is a legitimate concern, whether that's so far in the future that it's kind of lip service and maybe not all that much more. But that's how I would understand it. But Americans have to understand, they don't call their society communist. They never did. That's the name of their party. But they call what they have achieved a kind of socialism with special Chinese characteristics. And in addition to raising the standard of living of Chinese workers far beyond what anyone thought they could do, remember, because of the Cold War, the last 70 years, when the United States has given foreign aid to many countries around the world to help them get out of poverty, none of them have achieved it like the Chinese, who never got any foreign aid
Right.
because of the Communist Party, which reinforces for me the sense, you want to get out of poverty, you got to change your system
Yeah.
in basic ways. Otherwise, it's like you just said, Justin, a few minutes ago. It's like these government programs. The government gives a contract to a big business, or the government gives money to the state or the town, which in turn signs a contract with a big business. The money all ends up flowing to big business, and we know how they distribute it. Fat dividends to their shareholders, fat pay packages to their CEO, and the minimum to those at the rest. In other words, they reproduce the inequality that is the problem this system has.
When you see China kind of going around to some of the other Asian countries and helping them build their infrastructure, right? Helping them to become, to kind of get out of poverty. Do you see that as a way for them to kind of kind of separate from America, separate from the American hegemonic economic framework, and be able to develop their own? And also on top of that, like, imagine if we kind of have been doing that for the past 50, 60, 70 years with Latin American countries, right? Countries on this side of the hemisphere actually increasing our trade partners, but instead, what did we do? We shipped out all of our jobs to some of those countries, and we started coups in those countries, and we completely destabilized the region. And now we don't have any trade partners if China and Asia kind of go and develop something with Europe. So is that what China's kind of looking forward in the future to do?
I think so. I think so. I think you can see it in that Belt and Road initiative around the world that you pointed to. Helping other countries develop their transportation systems, their energy systems, and all of that. I think you can see it also in the COVID story. The Chinese have exported the overwhelming bulk of all the vaccines they've produced. They didn't do it only to get support around the world, but wow, when the American or Western European companies are holding on to their vaccines because they charge too much for poor countries to afford, but instead, the ships are offloading the Chinese vaccines or the Russian vaccines, or until recently, the Indian vaccines. Nobody's missing the lesson here. One part of the world is taking care of profits for the already rich pharmaceutical companies. The Chinese, because the way they control their economy, were able to use the lockdown in the Wuhan area to make their COVID disappear. They don't have COVID for the last 3/4 of a year. They beat it. We didn't. They did. And the whole world notices that too. They're able to respond in an effective way so they can afford to export their vaccines and make that part of their foreign program to win friends and influence people. Of course they're going to do that. And I think the United States is being outmaneuvered over and over again. Here's a final point, which has a certain irony to it. The very money that in the end, if we're lucky, will trickle down into the pockets of middle income and low income Americans. You know what they're going to do besides paying off their debts? Besides paying the landlord the rent they've been able to withhold for the last few months and all of that, they will finally go to Walmart or the mall. And you know where what they'll buy? Something made in China. And so ironically, a part of this will go back there. And there's nothing much anymore you can do about that. That cat is out of the bag and down the street. That's why my argument is we better understand that the United States is in a very different place. We're not soaring up. We're sliding down. China is soaring up. And that's not the end of the world. But we have to work something out, or else we're going to continue to go down. They're going to continue to go up. And lots of danger lurks in that scenario.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, it's actually kind of funny the way you explain it. It almost feels like China kind of sees America for what it is, sees our culture for what it is, especially economically. They took advantage of that capitalist culture, that
Absolutely.
capitalist greed, and the need for more and more profits every single quarter. And if that means shipping a job, shipping a bunch of jobs, buying everything from China, just so that these companies can make more and more in this quarter, so that their executives can make more and more in the bonuses that when they're in those positions. They took advantage of that. They looked at a long-term program, a long-term strategy, and we can never do that in this country because, like you said, everything is so focused on quarterly profits. Everything is so focused on how much money we're making right now for that quarterly earnings report so we can juice our stock price, so then we can get more bonuses, right? It all just works
Absolutely.
together, and it's wild.
That's why
And
it's a system issue. That's exactly right, Justin.
yeah,
It's a system issue. The Chinese said it. They said the only way we're going to win is if we can make the capitalists do for us what we need to grow our economy. And the only way they'll do that for us, they're not going to do it out of kindness. They're not going to do it out of solidarity. They're not going to do it out of their religious beliefs. They're going to do it for the same reason they do everything else. If there's profit in it, it's like dropping little bits of corn, and the chicken is going to follow you because it eats the corn, even if you're leading it into the slaughterhouse. It's literally that image. Give them profits and they'll come and they'll build their factories here and they'll give us their technology and they'll do all these things because we're giving them extra profits until finally we're big enough to say this game now is over and we're switching to a new one. And, it's like a mousetrap. At that point, the thing has come down. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure talking to you, sir. Really.
Yes, I know you got to go. So I really appreciate you coming on the show, Professor Wolff. I feel like I've learned so much in this past hour. I wish I would have had you as my economics professor, and I think I probably would have known a lot of this stuff a lot earlier. So I really appreciate it. Why don't you let everyone know where they can find you, where they can, listen if you're on a podcast or anything like that? Why don't you let the audience know about that?
We have a big presence on YouTube. I do a weekly radio and television show called Economic Update. It's free, available to you on YouTube. Just go YouTube/Economic Update. It'll take you right there. We also have a big presence on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And we maintain a website where you can get to everything we do. And the easiest way to note it, it's all one word: Democracy at Work. That's all one word, .info. Democracyatwork.info. Be my guest. Go there. Everything's free. And it's a way to connect to everything that we do. And if any of this today was of interest, you can find more of it there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for coming on the show. You're welcome back anytime. I'd love to dive more into this stuff even deeper than we did this time. So you're always welcome back.
I would love to. And thank you for the opportunity.
Of course. All right. Thank you, Professor Wolff.
Bye-bye.
All right. Wow. Awesome. That guy's awesome, huh? I mean, he knows his shit. I love talking not only to professors, but just thinkers, because, you can kind of dig deeper into their mindset. They've obviously are so well read, especially if they're a little bit older. They've really lived through a lot of the things that, myself or wasn't really aware of or wasn't alive for. So they can kind of really inform us. And a lot of time history repeats itself, right? When something like 2008, 2009 comes around, and then you're in the COVID crisis, you can kind of have an understanding of how the plutocrats, right, the kleptocrats and the people in government, these billionaires, how they're going to try and take advantage of that crisis in that moment to further enrich themselves once again. Never let a good crisis go to waste is what they say. So really appreciate him coming on. We're definitely going to have him back on the show. Let me get to some of these super chats. I'm sorry, because we're so tight on time, usually it's going to be pretty hard for me to read y'all super chat if it's a question, to Professor Wolff. So, or to the guest in general. So, I do apologize about that, but I just kind of want to keep the conversation flowing in a manner that, kind of makes sense for me and is easy to follow. So let me just catch up on some of these super chats. I do apologize if y'all wanted to ask questions of Professor Wolff, but I'll try and take note of them and then ask them next time. So Sybil Proxy, appreciate the super chat. And moving towards socialism, do we, working class, really have to tax ourselves comparably to German and Nordic countries? I don't think so, right? Because we already pay so much in taxes, kind of relative to other places around the country, right? It's just that we don't, or around the world. It's just that we don't get anything kind of out. We don't get anything out of those taxes. So you can't tell, I think it's going to be hard pressed for you to convince me, if we're going to change the economic system we have here today, that we don't actually tax, actually recoup all the taxes owed by these corporations or by these billionaires, that the tax would have to increase on, working class people, middle class people. In my opinion, really, it shouldn't even have to be that high in general. It probably could be even lowered. I mean, you're telling me someone making $25,000 a year should be taxed in the first place? Of course not. Obviously those people, no one should be making that low in general. Everyone should be making, at least $20 an hour. But if they're not going to change the minimum wage to that high, which we've obviously seen they don't want to do, I don't think people that are making that low of money should be being taxed in the first place. So yeah, I mean, if you get all that, I mean, it's like I did a story the other day. $1 trillion, the IRS chief said, is possible. $1 trillion every single year is not being collected by the IRS because they've been defunded to a point where they only have like 5,000 agents, and they can't go after these massive corporations who have 20, 30 lawyers and know every single way to get around all paying their taxes. So they end up going after people who don't have those resources, which end up being poor people. So personally, I want to see us recoup all those taxes that corporations and the wealthy owe, and then we can go from there, right? See if the tax policy needs to be changed at all when it comes to working class people. I personally don't believe it does. Catherine Goodset Wine, thank you so much for the super chat. $10, really appreciate that. Dr. Wolff, I appreciate your video about dialectic Socratic method of debate, which is based on critical thinking and questioning, which is a very important tool for solving problems. No, I agree. A lot of times when I'm talking to someone, especially if it's about politics and especially if they're not super knowledgeable about it, but even if you are in a debate with someone, it's a good way to kind of get them to kind of come to the understanding themselves, right? Or they either get put into a corner where they don't really know how to respond to that question. They don't really know how to explain their solution, because you've kind of backed them into a corner with all these questions and you made them really get themselves to this point, right, where they're like, oh, they're kind of stuck now, and then they essentially are probably going to go back to a talking point they heard from the media they ingest, right? Or they're going to be like, oh, well, that's not my expertise. Like I was saying with these economics professors, you can back them into a corner when it comes to the economy at large, if you actually know your shit. And then at that point, they'll be like, oh, well, I don't really know much about politics, so I'm going to deflect and not answer the question, even though you have a completely valid criticism that completely destroys my argument, completely destroys everything I'm teaching in this class, and really renders my existence in this space as a teacher obsolete. Okay, let's see the next one. Noli D, appreciate the super sticker, or maybe just a super chat, blank super chat. JH Scott 6, appreciate the super chat. CLM, appreciate the super chat from you. Now, I really appreciate you guys. Hope you guys enjoyed that conversation. I really did. Honestly, that was probably one of my favorite guests that I've had so far. Jim Barak, appreciate the super chat. Does Dr. Wolff support the recall of California Governor Newsom? I don't, he lives in New York, so I guess I'm not even sure if he knows what's going on with that, or how close of attention he pays with that. But I mean, honestly, like if he gets recalled, he'll probably just get replaced by another neoliberal or a Republican. So, but I honestly don't think he'll lose that recall election, because I think he is pretty popular in California. Obviously, people aren't that knowledgeable about his track record, but he kind of has a positive rap around these parts. Fractal, appreciate the super chat. Hello, with the way things are, is this corporate communism with capitalism as the fig leaf since the CARES Act? Is this corporate communism with capitalism as the fig leaf? I'm gonna have to think about that more in my mind and conceptualize that, because I feel like I understand what you're saying and I understand what you're asking. I just maybe I don't have a deep enough understanding to answer that, but Honestly, we essentially live like they've completely socialized the losses in this country, completely socialized the losses, um, but they privatize the gains. You really see it almost with it really shows obviously with the vaccine, right? Because any type of, I mean, the losses or the cost of business of developing that vaccine was socialized, at least like Moderna is completely socialized, but then the profits are privatized, right? When all these corporations get bailed out by the Fed, they're socializing the losses across the entire economy because they're going to print a bunch of money, and then you're going to see some of this the inflationary measures that we're seeing in the economy right now, which who's going to pay for that? Working people, right? If you have $100 million, you don't really care if food prices go up 20-30%. But if you're actually living balling on a budget and you have to find a way to survive on $15 an hour, then that food price goes up 20%, energy price goes up 10%. Then you're feeling that. So they're socializing the losses, but then the social the society doesn't get any of that benefit of that bailout, right? We don't get any equity in any of these companies, so that when they get their earnings reports or they get their dividends, it's socialized because we now own part of that company. It doesn't work like that. The company will see 100% of those profits, which means privatizing the gains. But the society itself will lose out because they socialize the losses. So essentially, that's what we're living under right now, and pretty much since 2008, 2009, that's been the case. Misanthropic and out of coffee, I think. Appreciate the super chat. I like that name. I nominated Dr. Richard Wolff for U.S. Senate for New York on the Movement for People's Party website. Damn, I should have told him about that. It would be really cool to see him run. It'd be really cool to see him run and shake things up in Congress. That'd be awesome. Fractal again with the super chat. Appreciate that. I asked about corporate communism because the Red Scare has happened with capitalism in the U.S. Seems like since FDR, the 1% was projecting all along. Yeah, I mean, pretty much. I think since this country's existence, we've been projecting the biggest issues here on every single other country. So that's pretty much our modus operandi. Fractal again with the super chat. Appreciate that. Corporations basically own all major institutions: media, finance, regulatory, transportation, food, health, tech, government, etc. Corporate communism. Interesting. Interesting. Okay. I see where you're going with that. Radical Leftist Agenda. Appreciate the 2 super chats. I'll read these back to back. Great show. Best guest. Super information. Now just to get the zombies to watch. I know that's the thing. We have to get more people, and it's always hard because people are working so hard to just survive in this country. Like when you see things like, half of our workers are living paycheck to paycheck, like the amount of stress and anxiety that brings to your life, like not knowing if, I don't know, you're gonna go to the bathroom at Amazon and all of a sudden you're gonna get fired, and then you're on your ass with a family to feed, and you don't have a job, and it's already hard enough to get a job. So I mean, it's just unbelievable the amount of stress and anxiety and work people have to go through. And then on top of that, trying to essentially teach them civics, right? And teach them kind of what's going on in this country without scaring them away with all these buzzwords that they've been taught to hate by the media, who's also owned by the corporations who have, talk about skin in the game, right? They have a huge incentive in keeping everyone zombified. So it's tough, but it's something that we have to continue to do, right? We have to continue to push. That's why I have this platform. I want to use it to kind of inform people, maybe people that are, in the sports and maybe follow me or like me just from my sports side and want to learn more about politics, but are scared, right? Are scared to get into it because they don't want to, speak about something they're not knowledgeable about. Essentially, we don't get taught anything about how government really works throughout our curriculum. So I think a lot of people are kind of just scared because they don't want to come off as an idiot, or they don't want to say something wrong or say something bad. I don't know, get canceled, all this type of shit. So we do have to continue to push to try and inform more and more people. And Radical Leftist Agenda, appreciate the super chat again. Thanks for schooling Destiny, by the way, Mr. Wolf. Yeah, I watched some of that. But I didn't get to catch all of it. But kind of the opening statement where Destiny like just read a definition of socialism like off of like Wikipedia. I pretty much knew at that point that it wasn't going to be like a serious conversation where both sides are actually arguing from, in a good faith perspective and pushing towards, a true debate and trying to get kind of their side to, I guess, win. We deal with stress by consumption. Exactly. We deal with stress by consumption. And that's exactly what the system wants, because our economy, our entire system is based on people continuously buying shit. And you see, as soon as like people aren't buying things anymore, even for like 2 weeks, the entire economy, entire country, the entire country collapses essentially and has to be bailed out once again by the Fed. Um, which, like you said, doesn't have, because of MMT, we've learned doesn't have to be completely pay for every single dollar. But when they do run these huge deficits and they do have these 0% interest rates and all this stuff, it does end up coming back to hurt normal working people. Because, like Professor Wolff and I talked about, you see these inflationary measures, you see this easy money, you see a lot of more money floating out there. So then everything becomes more expensive, which, those half of our workers that are working paycheck to paycheck and can't afford a $400 emergency, that's who that's going to affect mostly, right, in a negative way. And then all the companies that can borrow money, even if they have cash on their balance sheets, they can just borrow money at 0% interest. Why would you not do that, right? Why would you use the money that you already have on your balance sheet if you can just go to the Fed and get free money? Like, why would you do that? Then you could let the money you still have, you could use that to buy back your stocks, or you could use that to give your, executives huge bonuses, or, you can keep it, you don't have to use it, and you can just go out and purchase more things, right? Go out and like, if you talk about these hedge funds, you can go out and buy all these homes, right? Like 0% interest, just free money. Go out and buy all these homes, lock in that interest rate, and then end up doing what? Selling those homes, being, a corporate overlord, corporate landlord, and then sell those homes to people, or sell or rent it out. And you're just taking more and more ability of normal people to build wealth, which is, the way that middle class and lower income people build wealth is through their home, right? And investment in your home. And now more and more people are being priced out of that reality. So, Catherine said, Justin, honest, respectful debate is dialectic method that is necessary to solve problems. Yeah, we just don't do that anymore. We don't do that anymore in this country. We don't really have real debates, honest debates. Everything is just slandering, smearing, throwing names at people, assuming every single thing about their life, assuming every single thing about how they think, and not having the this is kind of, someone said, how come no teammates or other NFL players on here chatting? I'm trying, man. I'm trying. Have you had Thomas Frank on? I have not, but I would love to get Thomas Frank on. Wow, what was I just gonna say? I feel like I was just about to talk about something and I got sidetracked. I lost my train of thought. I lost my train of thought, but that's okay. Let me just catch up on some of see this part right here. Someone just said this. What does that have to do with anything? This man is old, like, he grew up in a time where it's not that hard to become a multimillionaire if you can, buy property, or, just as it was a lot easier at that time. So even if he is, what does that matter? That shit doesn't matter. That's exactly like, that's exactly what they used to smear Bernie. Essentially, you could say the same. I mean, I'm not a millionaire, but you could say, oh, he plays in the NFL, he has money. So therefore, what? I shouldn't be advocating to, tax billionaires more. I shouldn't be advocating for Medicare for all. I shouldn't be advocating for free college. That shit doesn't make any sense. You're not going to build a coalition like that. If you say, okay, if you have any money, you can't be involved in leftist politics. Like, that's the dumbest shit ever. People were saying that about Jimmy. Oh, he has money. He has a multi-million-dollar home. If that's even true, I don't know. But even if it is, well, I mean, that's not even that great of a house out here in LA, if you understand LA property and shit like that. But okay, he has a successful show. That people watch. It's essentially, he's made that money essentially crowdsourcing, right? Crowdfunding, or whatever that shit's called. It's about people actually giving him money, like $5 a month, $10 a month. It's not because he sold out to some corporation and he's getting millions of dollars from them. That doesn't make any sense. That has no bearing on the argument at all. It's just a smear, right? It's a red herring. Or what do you call it? Not a red herring. It's now I'm forgetting. And Jimmy's made his money off comedy. Yeah, he had literally specials on Netflix. Gaslighting, smear tactics, exactly. Straw man. I think that's what I meant to say, a straw man. So Justin dissed Jimmy's house. Now I'm sure I'd love Jimmy to have me over his house. I'm sure he's got a nice house. I'd love to buy a house, but I'm honestly don't have enough money to buy property in California. It would not be a good thing for me to do because everything out here is so damn expensive. Like the apartment I live in, if it was like a condo, it probably at least cost $1 million at least. Like I can't afford that shit. And so many people can't. And if I can't afford housing out here, right? If I can't afford housing out here, do you think that anyone who is actually a middle class or working class person can even come close to affording housing out here? No way. And a lot of people can't even afford housing in the same communities they grew up in. Like, how fucked up is that? So, straw man. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. So, someone said we like class traders. Stupid. Exactly. That's what we need, right? We just whoever wants to join the coalition, come on in, right? If you want free public college, if you want us to end the wars, reinvest the money back home, build infrastructure, actually start to compete on a world stage in a way that's outside of us just using our military to go around the world and enforce that everyone adheres to everything we want, levying sanctions on. If you're against that shit, if you're for Medicare for all, you're for universal health care, if you're for worker-owned co-ops, if you're for that, come join the coalition. You see how I didn't ask like what their background is. I didn't ask who they voted for in 2016. I didn't ask how much money they have. I asked, do they support these policies? If you support the policies, you can be a part of the coalition and we can all fight together to get those policies done. So I want to end sanctions on Cuba and Venezuela. Exactly. Well, Daniel, do you have money? Do you have any type of money? Are you well off? Because then you can't believe that and you can't be a part of our coalition because you have a little bit of money. Or because I don't know, did you vote for Trump in 2016? Okay, you can't be a part of this coalition. I'm sorry. Even if you want to end those things and you want to fight for the same policies that I want because you did those things in the past, I'm sorry. I just can't be around you. You make my skin crawl. And someone said unless you go on Tucker, of course. Like exactly. So come on. Come on. It's the same people that were so happy that Bernie went on Fox and got a whole audience of Fox News viewers who we know are very propagandized, very brainwashed into a certain way of thinking. But when you hit them with something that affects their lives, and sometimes that's enough for them to look past that propaganda, right? If someone on Fox News is telling them, "Oh, it's okay for a healthcare company to screw you, right, make you go bankrupt," and then Bernie comes on and says, "I want you to get healthcare guaranteed, no matter what situation you're in," they clap for that and they want that because they've been exposed to something different, right? And then you have someone like Elizabeth Warren, like, oh, I'm not going to legitimize Fox News. Like, that's the same shit as being like, oh, those people who watch it, all deplorables, not worth me talking to. How far is that going to get you? How far is that going to get you? And then those same people came back and were like, oh, Jimmy went on Fox, Jimmy went on Tucker. Okay, but don't you want him to change the minds of all those people on Tucker Carlson and understand that us leftists, we're not just partisan, we're not just we're not out here just capping for the Democrats. We're not out here capping for the Republicans. We're not out here capping for any parties. We're pushing policies. You know, someone say don't throw your money away on rent. I know I don't want to throw it away on rent, but I don't have stability either. That's the thing, bro. I can't just buy a house in California and then next year I'm in Florida or I'm in New York. I don't want to have to do that right now. I don't want to have to do that and then like have to sell my home here and all that type of stuff, especially in this market right now. So I definitely will own something, but just not right now, and definitely not in California. It's too expensive. So no, they don't want that. Justin at least want us divided and fighting one another so we don't fight them. Exactly. Isolation is censorship, which makes manipulation much easier. Don't fall for that BS thinking. Has anyone else noticed that on Twitter? It's like so algorithmic. I feel like I don't see any other like outside tweets, any other outside voices. When I tweet, I feel like I'm just screaming into like the void of an echo chamber because they made it so algorithmic that you don't even see any type of external views anymore. That's just horrible. Like I don't even like Twitter anymore. Thomas Horter, appreciate the come to Green Bay. Someone's Thomas Horter, appreciate the super chat. We need voices like yours. Keep up the fight. A+. But hey, thank you, man. I appreciate that. Tucker's generally full of shit, but he does have a huge platform. Of course. I mean, like he's no better than any of the other people that are full of shit on corporate media. He's no better. I mean, he's probably a lot worse, but at the same time, he has a platform with people that watch him. And if you want to go on there and espouse his views, then I'm gonna go on and I'm gonna say, okay, there's something wrong with that. But if you're gonna go on there and espouse your own views and try and get his viewers to convert over to to stop watching his show and come watch Jimmy Dore, then I think that's a net freaking positive for our movement. You know, do many NFL players in the NFL have the same political views as you? I think a lot more people in the NFL are starting to come around, but it, I think a lot of players in the NFL, kind of from what I've seen, obviously you're going to have your conservative players, but and you're going to have your just liberal players. It's weird because sometimes I feel like people try and take like NFL players as some type of like kind of put them on an island as if they're any different than the general American public. And I think just as far as the general American public goes, a lot of people are very misinformed and uninformed when it comes to politics, which usually leads to them being more apolitical, right? So I think since BLM and since kind of just like the past few years since Trump, like a lot more people are paying attention, and I think a lot more people are having um more confidence to like actually go out there, research and come to understand a lot more about kind of how our system functions and what needs to change. And really, because a lot of NFL players come from these communities that, have been completely rejected by, mainstream thought, being completely rejected by like legislation, just by the establishment of both parties. Um, I think we should be progressive, right? We should be a lot more kind of in tune with what would be the right policies to help um, our communities. But I think people have been so beat down in the past, and this especially kind of is true for the Black community, I believe. It's that people don't believe that voting does anything, right? People, think about people's parents who have voted for Clinton, people's parents who voted for Obama, right? Maybe even voted for Bush, or like they've been voting for 20, 30 years. And what changes? What has changed substantially, right? Or sorry, substantively in their communities? There's been no substantial change. None. It's really been a regression. So if you it's I think people get so dejected from politics. People, like Professor Wolff was saying, if you have a skin in the game, right, when you're actually leaving that bathroom, you're going to turn the light off if you actually have skin in the game. But if you know that if they put some sign on the door, it's just going to affect it's just going to affect the owners and the boss. I don't give a fuck, I'm just going to leave the light on, probably in spite of them, right? So if people actually feel like getting into politics and paying attention to it can actually change something for the communities that they come from, then people would be much more inclined to actually get involved. But see, that's the issue, is the establishment does not want that. And the establishment has made it clear that whichever party you vote for, especially if you're in a Black community, your community will look the same in 4 years. Your community will, okay, if you vote for Biden, maybe you'll get a tax credit. You'll get a child tax credit. That's what you'll get. You won't get your wages increased. You'll get a tax credit. Is that going to help change that community? Is that going to free up enough capital for people to start businesses and provide jobs in those communities? No, it's not going to do that. It's not going to do that. So you're sitting there acting like the Democrats are actually changing these people's communities and injecting this idea and optimism in politics. And that's just not the case, because people don't see that. People don't see it directly affecting their own lives. So they don't have any skin in the political game. And that's the issue, right? That's the issue. Take the fights to those who are orchestrating our problems. Progressive movement equals fight against inequity. Yep, exactly. So we can start with why Camilla convinced some squad members to not threaten to vote down the COVID bill or the $15 minimum wage. Exactly. And this is why you can't come up to me and convince me that progressives in the squad really have the sense of urgency that is necessary. They don't. Because if the $15 minimum wage which for me, I would have voted against it because I'm like, that needs to be $20 and it needs to be $20 now. You know what I mean? But there's, so that's a complete different, kind of ether, coming at that with a lot of different energy than what they came at it with, which is, oh, we couldn't get it this bill, but maybe we'll get a next bill. Well, all the same hurdles are there, all the same people are there. You already had 8 Democrats that voted against just the motion to put it, to have it debated on or whatever, put it back in the bill. They voted on the motion, or sorry, they voted against the motion to proceed so that Bernie could put it in the bill. They voted against that. They didn't even vote against the wage. And it needed 60 votes to pass anyway. They could have just virtue signaled and voted for it. But this is how much they disdain something like a $15 minimum wage increase, that they won't even virtue signal for it. Even in a situation where they vote yes and it still won't come to pass, they still will say, nah, fuck it, we'll vote no. Like, that's the type of people we're dealing with in the Democratic Party. And what I just put out a video and I said, you have to own those people. You have to own Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, because you went out and told voters that if you get a 50-50 Democratic majority, that these things would get done. You can't go back to those same voters and say, well, we had 50, but those 2 Democrats, they're rogue senators. They're not really, I didn't really mean that when I said a 50-50 Senate. So now we need you to come out and elect more of us to get this done. You can't do that to people, bruh. You can't do that shit. And that doesn't fly. They're a part of your party. And if you can't get them to actually come around and vote yes on some of this stuff and reform or get rid of the filibuster and actually pass some of this legislation, then that falls back on your party. So don't be surprised in 2022 when people aren't coming out and voting for your ass because you didn't do what you promised for them, and you're using Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema as an excuse, as if Joe Biden hasn't done a single damn thing to pressure them, as if Chuck Schumer didn't do a single thing to pressure them on the minimum wage by keeping it in the bill. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. So, I mean, they're going to have a real problem in 2022. I'm telling you, they're going to have a problem. And there's just the fact they already have a disadvantage because of the new census that came out and the redistricting that's going to happen. So I don't know. I don't know what the people in government are waiting for. The progressives and Democrats. Look, if you don't win in 2022, y'all are fucked. Like that. I don't know how else to explain that, because if you don't win in 2022 and you can't do anything for the rest of that 2 years, as we're going to be seeing some real changes and some real crisis, some more like, burgeoning crises in this country, because they didn't increase the minimum wage and they didn't, do anything to kind of improve people's day-to-day lives. They're not going to win in 2024. That's just not going to happen. Like, well, why would anyone go out and vote for you if, you haven't done anything for them in 2 years, as they're facing a lot of hurdles in their own life, a lot of stresses and obstacles in their own lives. It don't look too great for them. I don't want to miss this. Great. Zach Boyles, man. Appreciate the super chat. Many autonomous platforms on blockchain are completely socialized, all profit and risk, evenly distributed to all participants. Need to make them more easily accessible to exploited communities. 100%. No, I'm with that. And I think, when Max Kaiser, and I watched the Kaiser report, and I listened, and I've been doing a lot more research about the blockchain and about Bitcoin and some of these cryptocurrencies, and the fact that they are decentralized, right? The fact that there aren't all these barriers to entry, which you see within our system, right? You don't have all the crazy things that punish poverty when it comes to something like the blockchain, when it comes to something like Bitcoin. So it actually is much more democratic in that fashion. It's much more evenly, like you're saying, distributed to all participants. So we need to figure out a way to get like you said, exploited communities to understand, and I think invest more in this, because I mean, who knows what's going to happen. It's almost impossible to build wealth now, with buying a home. Wages are pretty much stagnant. It's so like, what are you going to start a business nowadays? One, with what capital? Two, how are you going to compete with any of these corporate giants that rule every single sector? So it doesn't look that great for, your, regular working class person that's looking to build wealth, that's looking to get out of the cycle of poverty. So I think that's definitely something we should be looking into. Appreciate that super chat, Zach. John K, appreciate the super chat. Love your show, Justin. P.S. Ryan Grimm is debating Ryan Knight tonight in the Vanguard. Ooh, should I I kind of want to when is that? When is that? I want to live stream. That'd be cool. That'd be really cool. And I actually will be on the Vanguard probably in a few weeks. So stay tuned for that. But I really love their show over there. And yeah, everyone definitely tune into that tonight. And they're growing very rapidly. They're growing very rapidly and deservedly so. I think they have a really entertaining show and they have great guests on. Um, yeah, I almost want a second person. That's why I think I want to have a regular guest to come on with me because I like that back and forth conversation. Obviously, I love talking with you guys in the chat, but I like that back and forth conversation as well. With somebody to kind of keep things moving along. It's at 9 p.m. Eastern time. Okay, so 6 here. Okay, we'll see. We'll see. Do some live commentary along with the debate. Maybe. Yeah, I might have to do that. We'll see. But I do have to hop off. I got some other stuff I have to do. But really appreciate y'all stopping by, watching the conversation with Professor Wolff. That was really fun. We'll definitely have to do something like that again. And I'm trying to get more guests on the show. So, I'll be announcing some more pretty soon. We'll be having more probably next week. So appreciate everyone tuning in. Everybody stay safe. Enjoy your Wednesday. I know it's hump day, 2 more days to the weekend. Everybody stick with it. It's tough. It's tough nowadays, but everyone stick with it. All right. I'll be here. Appreciate everybody. Everybody stay safe, stay up. Peace.